you all for attending today. It's lovely to see so many people have joined the call. The main purpose of today's webinar really is to just have a think about telehealth. It's become such a huge part of everybody's working life over the past year that actually now we're finally getting a chance to step back a little bit and have a think about, has it been successful? Has it not? And if not, why not? So in 2020, the House of Commons made an announcement to say that as of that moment in time, the main principle of all healthcare going forwards that was not immediate care should be digital first. So making the use of telehealth and teletherapy techniques to deliver continuing care rather than face-to-face techniques. Now, telehealth is obviously a remote provision of any kind of healthcare or support using technology. So that could be using phones, using laptops, using tablets. And it's known by lots and lots of different names by different professionals, different parents, and different family settings. So today we're going to refer to it a couple of different ways, partly because we're therapists and we all have our own practical references that we use in our daily lives, but also just to represent really that difference in settings and across client groups. So we might call it telepractice, telemedicine, teletherapy, telehealth, or remote therapy. So previously, teletherapy really was only used in less urban areas where transport can be a bit of an issue. So thinking like places like high up in the Lake District, for example, or where clients find it particularly challenging to get to a service location. For clinicians working in urban areas, actually for us, we've probably never used it before as a regular therapy input. And I know it's been quite challenging for a lot of us professionally and personally to get used to that massive shift of face-to-face communication over to telecommunication. So as a result of the pandemic, a lot of therapists who may not have had a lot of experience with technology have actually been thrown into a whole new world, and they've been forced to just adapt on the fly, really. And as a result of this, as things are now starting to settle a little bit and that chaos is starting to recede, we're now able to sit back and think about, okay, let's make some reflections on our time over the past year and our practice, and let's see if that's going to have an impact on our practice going forwards. So today we're going to explore a few different areas within telehealth. The main things we'll explore are some facts and figures, some of the barriers that we at ATtherapy have encountered during our time over the past year, some of the benefits again that our team members have encountered, but also looking at wider benefits that the nation have reported, and also some case studies of clients which we support, because sometimes it's just really nice to see a real life example of a time when teletherapy has gone really, really well, or actually it's not worked so well and we've had to think on our feet and do something different. So I'm going to pass you over to Em now to talk a little bit more about the facts and figures.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nikki. So hello, everyone. I am Emily, and I'm going to start off with talking you through some of those facts and figures that Nikki's just referred to. So you'll see a few on the screen there, and the first one I want to bring your attention to is the one in the top right of the screen. So that states that in 2018, there were still 5.3 million adults in the UK, which is effectively 10% of the adult UK population, who were non-internet users. And I just think that that's a really important foundation and an important thing for us to bear in mind when we're talking about the evolution of digital services and talking about certainly delivering therapy services, assessments and interventions more remotely and more digitally, because that's actually certainly when I was considering this and access to technology, I thought that number would be lower than it is. And certainly as we've evolved our work over the last 12 months, it is a barrier that we have sort of come face to face with on more than one occasion. So I think that's a really important foundation for us to bear in mind when we're considering some of the benefits of teletherapy, that actually also we need to be mindful of still delivering person-centered inclusive care. The next fact that I want to draw your attention to is the one in the bottom left of the corner there. So that one is saying basically that the KELF and other standardised assessments can now be reliably administered online. So the KELF is a speech and language therapy assessment that we as clinicians often use with children and young people, and it's one of the standardised assessments, which means it's one of the ones that we use in our formal initial assessment process, and it allows us to get a standardised score to compare where the client is that we're working with other people in that age population. And that's an important part of our assessment process, but previously, sort of pre-pandemic, wasn't something that was freely available. So a lot of those standardized assessments were a chunky book or a bag that we as therapists would take with us, that played a really crucial role in that face-to-face interaction and gave us a structure to that assessment process. But it did need to be done face-to-face. Obviously, over the course of the last 12 months, some of those companies that produce these assessments and resources have really pulled together to make them more digital, to make them more freely accessible. And actually, it's really benefited a lot of different therapy services, but certainly us as speech and language therapists, we've been able to quite flexibly adapt that assessment process and ensure that the same level of assessment, same level of standardized score is available, and we can use that in a much more flexible, creative way. So that's been a real positive. And more assessments than maybe some of us realise are actually available online now. So that's a real benefit. If we look to the one on the bottom right of the screen now, so there was a systematic review in 2019 by Covert et al, and that identified that only 0.9% of non-telehealth methods were more advantageous. So actually, certainly when I was just reflecting clinically and when I've had discussions with parents and carers, that number is a lot lower than I anticipated that it would be. So kind of in terms of myth busting there, I think a lot of us pre-pandemic felt that face-to-face methods were surely considerably more advantageous. Direct intervention would be significantly more beneficial. But actually, that systematic review identified that it was only 0.9% of non-telehealth methods that were more advantageous. So again, it's a nice positive for us to stand on and move forward with thinking about how we're delivering. Okay, I'm just going to pause for one moment and check that everybody else can see the screen. We've had one message from a delegate that can't. Yeah? Okay, we'll continue. Fantastic, thank you for that. So the final fact and figure for us to kind of bear in mind here is the success of telehealth is impacted by the therapist delivering it. So I can feel lots of you thinking, well, surely that's quite common sense, and absolutely. But in terms of some of the barriers that we've actually encountered over the last 12 months, I think it's certainly a more fluid and really active thing that can impact the efficacy of telehealth. So the non-verbal skills of the therapist, you've been watching me present for a few minutes, you've probably noticed that I do use my hands. I move around a little bit as I'm talking. I'm using my body to communicate. But the remote provision of a service does take some of that away. And we all communicate in very different ways. So Niki in a moment is going to really break that down and talk to you about communication skills. But actually, the non-verbal communication skills of an individual therapist can absolutely impact how that teletherapy session might run. Technology problem solving skills is another one. I'm sure everybody here today has had the phrase, you're on mute, or can you see my screen? I've just checked if someone can see the screen. Bandied about as part of your daily routine now. It's become part of the norm, hasn't it? And we've all had to upskill ourselves in terms of technology to ensure that we're doing that effectively. An additional issue is some of us use different technology platforms to deliver teletherapy. So the problem solving skills in terms of tech for a therapist can also impact that session. We also need to understand the evidence base. And this is kind of the approach that Niki and I started off today, is looking at the evidence base. You know, it's very current, it's very recent and up to date. Everybody, therefore, has their own sort of professional bias, their own clinical experience that will cause them to have a different perspective on how some of that evidence base is considered and discussed. And I therefore think sort of webinars and platforms for discussion like this one are really important opportunities for us as professionals to discuss, to strategize, and make sure that that understanding of the evidence base is consistent, and we have the opportunity to evolve as therapists as the evidence base evolves as well. And then the final thing that we as well have encountered that links with this study is therapists can impact the session because they have to manage their own fears. So remote input, certainly when I first started delivering more input remotely, when the first lockdown happened last March, I definitely felt a little bit anxious about how am I going to make this access to as make this accessible to as many of my clients as possible. And not only that, I'm going to have to regulate their concerns and their worries about it all being remote and losing that social interaction element of things and that face-to-face non-verbal side that we would get. So I think the therapist has to be multi-skilled, really, in terms of delivering their own input, managing the technology, understand the evidence base enough to adapt the session, manage their own fears and the client's fears. So whilst it's a simple statement to say that telehealth success is impacted by the therapist, but there's multi-layers there and it's a multifaceted discussion as to how that's actually impacted. So we're going to lead forward now and actually look a little bit more and unpick the barriers and the benefits to using telehealth.
Thanks, Em. Okay, so starting to think of some of the barriers of telehealth, this is a little image in front of you that some of you might have seen before, especially if you've received speech and language therapy training in the past, or if you've had clinical discussions with maybe one of the ATtherapy team. It's a model that was originally designed by Albert Moravian, based on some work that he did in the 1960s. And he was a psychologist who was quite interested in communication linked to the discussion of emotions. So thinking about what do we do and what do we say when we're talking about emotions. So you can see in the image here, there are three separate areas within the pie chart, if you like. We've got how you speak, the words, and your body language. So if we start with body language, it's the biggest chunk on your screen by a mile. We're thinking here about your posture, what you're doing with your arms, as Em said, do you use your hands a lot to communicate? If I did this, would many of you follow my finger and look to the corner? It's taken into account all of our things like facial expression too, that are really massive in putting across a message. The next section on the pie chart is how you speak. So now we're thinking about what kind of a voice are we using? What tone of voice? What's our intonation like? If I said I've had a great morning, you're probably not going to think that I've had a great morning, even though the word that I use suggests that I did. That follows quite nicely on to words. So the actual language that we use. There's a really nice phrase that I heard somewhere that the essence of lying is in deception, not the words. And if you sort of stop for a moment and think about it, it's really true. The words of the lie aren't a lie. It's the context that they've been used in that is the deception there. So it just really makes you pause for a second and think that, there is lots to communication. Now, this model is very frequently misused, and that's by professionals as well as parents and, other members of education teams or care teams. It's often overgeneralized and it's oversimplified. This model doesn't represent all communication. It doesn't represent all the contexts in which we communicate. It is one specific communicative event. However, the reason that we've brought it up today to discuss is because actually it puts some really important considerations out there and some really important things for us to think about. That there is so much more to communication than just what we say. It really is about how we say it and all of those other elements combining together to create what is essentially successful communication. Now, when we're thinking of this model in the context of telehealth and teletherapy, really, it would suggest that video conferencing communication, so video calls on things like Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp, they're not as reliable as genuine face-to-face conversations. When we can pick up on all the body language, we can really accurately pick up on tone of voice. When you've not got internet glitches or, as Em said, background noise, people forgetting to turn their microphones on. There's lots that's missed, as well as things like intermittent video feeds, which is a bit of a nightmare. I had a session recently with one of my clients who, on the surface and on his screen, which is a very small camera size, seemed really calm, seemed really engaged. And it was only when his support worker stopped the session to say, actually, under the table, you can't see, but his legs are jiggling up and down, he's fiddling with his fingers. That then instantly made me think, right, we need to start. We need to do some self-regulation. We need to explore what's going on outside of the remits of my screen. And that's something that if the support worker hadn't been there, I would have completely missed, purely because of the fact that I'm behind a screen and can't see the whole picture, if you like. Okay, Em, I'll pass on to you for some more barriers.
Brilliant, thank you, Niki. So we've sort of set the scene there in terms of communication, what's needed and what might be missed when we're using a screen. We also discussed, as kind of the first point really, access to technology and the internet. So we already know that 5.3 million adult users in the UK don't have access to internet. But as I've been working more and more, and particularly with schools in different local authorities, actually a lot of families may have access to the internet, but they don't have access to technology to screen a teletherapy session or to access consistent input. And I think that's, again, really, really important, because as information, communication and service access is increasingly becoming sort of digital by default, those citizens, those people that we work with who are the least connected are at risk really of kind of becoming digitally marginalised. And I think it's really important. We as therapists very much work with a code of conduct, and we work with a person-centred approach and a holistic approach to care. And we want to make sure that we are treating individuals as individuals, and they might not be able to access a remote point of service. So I think that's really important. The next barrier to discuss is kind of cybersecurity and different telehealth platforms. So certainly when the first pandemic, the only pandemic, but the first lockdown hit last March, I'd never heard of Zoom, and then suddenly everything was going on via Zoom. I'm sure that most people will be familiar with the fact that Zoom certainly came under some criticism for difficulties and a lack of cybersecurity. There were some Zoom rooms being hacked, inappropriate images being posted in sort of what we thought were locked rooms. So cybersecurity has been a real concern, and everybody has had to work quite hard to reduce some of those, and therefore look to other platforms that might be more secure. That then leads us on to the different telehealth platforms. So I know certainly lots of my NHS colleagues all use Microsoft Teams as their kind of go-to platform. I have some clients and families who prefer Skype. So actually, we're all working on different platforms, which is great that we're all really flexible, but it means that each of us has a slightly different preferred option. And then when we come to work with somebody on a different option, we have to jump over to their platform. And then comes the whole barrage of, how do I share my screen on this one? Has this platform got a whiteboard that we can use to play interactive games? And we have to adapt and flex each time, which is fine. We're evolving, but it can be a barrier when we're trying to deliver something really strategically and really fluidly. I've mentioned briefly already as well, the currently quite limited evidence base. So it's a positive in terms of it's really up to date and it's constantly evolving as more studies and more research comes through, but it is still quite limited. And I think it's important that, yeah, we absolutely use teletherapy where it's appropriate, where it's going to benefit, where it's going to provide progress and targeted support, but actually acknowledge that limited evidence base and keep looking back to it, keep checking what else is coming through so that we can continue to really champion good practice and the best forms of input, forms of access that's going to benefit all of our clients. And I've mentioned already, kind of linking to access to technology and that support of what's available at home, but it's not necessarily appropriate for everyone. So some of the people that I've worked with that have found it more difficult to access have been individuals whose first language isn't English. Specific age groups have found it more difficult than others, and certainly for some of those initial assessments where the assessment information is available for me to carry out online. I saw a 79-year-old gentleman recently who it was quite important to him that it wasn't done via teletherapy. That was too daunting and would have caused the extra anxiety around an already anxious assessment process for him. And then there's individuals with complex learning disabilities or physical disabilities that maybe can't move around as much to access the screen or to access games, and again would rather have that face-to-face input. So I think it's very important, and that kind of graphic, we've gone in a nice circle. So from the point of access to technology and coming round, we've identified that it might not be appropriate for everyone, and that takes us back up to some of those other reasons. So it's a bit of a circle, and I think it's important for us to think about that when we're considering holistic care and a person-centred approach.
Okay, so moving now on to some of the benefits, of telehealth. In a pandemic, the main benefit is obviously that we are completely avoiding any unnecessary in-person contact. There's, absolutely no infection risk. We're able to send out resources beforehand that can be quarantined if needs be. It just makes sure that we're putting our clients in the best possible position in terms of risk of infection. Moving around the sort of diagram as Em's just done, there are some main areas of benefit within the model. So improved access to care is a huge one. For many of our families during this time, without telehealth, they wouldn't have an access to any support in terms of their speech and language therapy, which is really tricky, you know, and for a lot of families, it's massively important to them to carry on, not only to make progress with targets, but also for a lot of our clients' mental health. You know, for some of our clients, we are one of the only professionals that has maintained contact throughout lockdown. And for some young people, that's huge. You know, they might have lost access to friends. So having a friendly face that can log on once or twice a week and just even update us on football scores or what they've been doing with their mum, then that's lovely. It's also reduced the need for us to be travelling around, which has been fantastic for us and for clients too, for a number of different reasons, which I'll come to later. It's been great for ease of sharing information amongst professionals. So a few of my colleagues, we find it really difficult to meet up to share information. And this is even before the pandemic, it's really tricky. But what remote access and telehealth has enabled us to do is to actually say, well, we can do it in half an hour. Let's just do it over, you know, a very short period of time during the day, which we can all put aside, rather than having to factor in an hour drive to get there and an hour drive to get back. It's really nice for some clients as well whose support team might vary and has varied during the pandemic. You know, their sessions aren't reliant upon having a certain member of staff there, as some of our therapists have reported was originally the case pre-pandemic. So there are lots of ease of access issues that have been a benefit from telehealth during the lockdown. Another main benefit really is fewer missed appointments. You know, it's been fantastic, the access that we've had to our clients, because not only are we able to access them at home, but also in community settings as well. You know, I did a session in a park via Zoom and it was brilliant. And it's really enabled us as therapists to be completely flexible and to push the boundaries on therapy. You know, who says that we can't work on information carrying words in a park? Who says that we can't work on things on a beach? It doesn't matter. As long as there is access to technology, the client's able to focus and is able to participate, let's go for it and we'll give anything a try. It's meant that also if we've had issues with lockdowns coming in overnight, as has happened multiple times now, we're not having to cancel sessions and leave clients disappointed and, you know, leave us with gaps in our diaries too, where all we would want to be doing is giving input. So it's made us as therapists become lots more flexible in our working. You know, the feedback across the team really is that our whole approach to therapy has completely changed, and as has our clients' approach to therapy and to receiving therapy too. Cost saving is a massive one, especially in the medico-legal field. We're able to save funds and then those funds are able to be used elsewhere. So, you know, for one of my clients, we've saved a lot of money on travel time and expenses. So what we've done is we've actually turned that into more direct sessions of input, which has been fantastic and has led to, you know, more attainment and quicker target progression, which is all that we want as therapists. That's fantastic. So parents are pleased with that. Case managers are pleased with that. It's a win-win for everybody when it works. But as Em said, it's just very dependent on client by client basis, really. Great one, as I've kind of touched on already, is just the flexibility. You know, for some of our clients, they prefer to access on a mobile phone. As long as it works for the client, that's absolutely fine with us. We will go with the flow. We're all getting very used to working with multiple platforms now. I think by the end of this, we will be tech whizzes, all of us. But what it really allows for as well is just really intensive blocks of input, where previously our diaries as therapists wouldn't have allowed it. You know, with some of our clients, we're doing multiple sessions in a week for shorter amounts of time. And we've seen that's been a real benefit. We've made loads more progress because actually they're not getting tired towards the end of the session. They're still raring to go, which means then as a therapist, I can say, okay, well, your time with me is finished, but I'm going to leave you this task to carry on with your support worker. So it's just great at getting everybody involved. And I know personally, a lot of the support staff I work with have been fantastic. And if anything, the lockdown has helped get them even more engaged with therapy because they're taking on more of a role. They're hiding things around the room, they're printing out pre-packs, they're carrying on activities, as I've just said. It's really different for them and different for the clients too, which is just a nice break from the monotony of a year-long lockdown, I think. We're also able to offer a wider range of appointment times because we're not tied in again with travel or with school days, things like that. And, you know, with a lot of our clients, we're actually continuing to see them remotely, even though some of them have headed back to school, because it's working well for schools and it's working well for us. So, you know, we're just taking every day as it comes, really, but being very mindful that this might and is likely to impact our work going forwards. My main benefit, which isn't on here actually, but it's just an additional thing I'd like to mention, is that I feel like it's been a huge improvement in relationships as well with clients and their families. So as a therapist who's worked with a lot of my clients in schools, it's lovely to be in the home environment, even not if in person, but to take part in things like birthdays and cooking in the kitchen and doing lots of family activities. You know, you become more of a part of the family almost because you are right there in the middle of it. Kids running past in the background screaming, you know, cats, dogs, everybody's getting involved. And it just makes for a much more fun and interactive session, which that's what speech therapy should be about, you know, getting everybody involved and generalizing those skills. You know, if you can use your device to tell your brother to go away and shut the door, fantastic, let's do that. And it's a bit more motivational than some of the things we might previously have done in a school setting, in a small room, just us and a support worker. And the last thing I'm just going to mention as a benefit really is the fact we're really able to revisit long-term therapy programs and push forwards with a bit more independence for our clients. So, you know, some of them are less reliant now upon staff because we can say to staff, put the headphones on and leave them to it. And actually we're able to get much more out of them because there's less prompting there that sometimes isn't necessarily the best thing. So it's giving us a chance to see what they can do without all that extra support, but knowing that it is there in the background if we do need it. It's been fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of case studies now. So I'll pass you over to Em.
Thank you, Niki. So yeah, I'm going to start off with talking to you about a case study for whom remote therapy has been really successful. And we're going to tie in a lot of the benefits here that Niki's just talked about so we can see it in practice and see how it's actually practically worked. So this is Archie. He was 6 at the point of starting to access teletherapy. As you can see from the picture there, he uses a Liberator NovaChat device and he uses direct access to select words, which means he's got his device and he touches the screen to select cells and produce the words. It's worth pointing out though that at the point of starting teletherapy, Archie's device wasn't in place yet. He didn't have it assigned to him, and we'd just finished that assessment process and had ordered it. So we had a period of waiting, and I had to think really creatively about how I was going to support him to continue to develop. He's got a range of total communication skills, really. He's a skilled signer, his receptive language skills are excellent, he's got emerging brilliant literacy skills. So we wanted to make sure that therapy was still possible and progress was still possible remotely. But without his device, it was difficult for him to communicate at times. So we had to be really creative. So some of the kind of key things that helped was that Archie's really motivated. He loves speech therapy sessions. He's very motivated by letters, sounds, words, putting words together, communicating. He's a really, really enthusiastic communicator, which really helps. He and I had a really good existing relationship. So he thought speech therapy was fun. He therefore was more than happy to join in and get stuck in with whatever I'd prepared. Archie had a really good level of independent mobility, so he can get out of his chair, move around, navigate the living room by himself, which meant that I could be quite flexible in maintaining his attention and his focus and sort of preparing a few activities that might be shorter in length, but that might be, one was hidden under, you know, parents would support me to hide something underneath his daybed, hide something behind a sofa cushion. He could find them, bring them to the screen. And that actually was a really nice back and forth way to maintain his attention and keep that focus going. Archie's parents were another benefit, really. They were really available to be involved with therapy sessions. and to supervise, because obviously that was a limitation for me in that I couldn't support with behaviour and excitement levels as I would typically in person. And it was really positive to sort of coach parents through certain activities, certain letters, certain approaches that we were using, why we were using them. I really do feel that that helped to carry things over throughout the week. And it was really nice to really build that rapport and work more closely with parents, where previously sort of input might have been they'd bob in and bob out of a session because they've got other children at home and everybody's working from home during the pandemic. So that was another really nice positive. And I think that was another thing that Archie really enjoyed, was their really active role in the sessions. A couple of the barriers that we encountered was initially the screen that Archie was seeing me on was on kind of a mini tablet size. And that was a little bit too small for him. He kept trying to make me bigger. He kept trying to zoom with his fingers. And over time, we started to lose his attention. He was really keen for social interaction. He really kept asking when I could come to the house, if I wanted to come and just stay for the week, Emily. Which obviously, in terms of the pandemic, was difficult to explain and describe. But we were really fortunate because Archie has a really supportive case management team. So actually, we were able to get him a bigger screen to access remote sessions on, which made him much happier that I was much bigger. But the only other thing that was still difficult sort of remotely was that management of behaviour. So if I was doing something really fun with him and he was getting really excited, where I would typically be able to monitor his sensory integration levels or excitement levels and emotional level, provide some deep pressure or proprioceptive input or whatever it might be that he needed, that was much difficult to monitor and see, especially if he was bobbing off the screen to get something and bobbing back. So again, there was a lot of close working with the parents in this case and care team when they came back home. But all in all, some of those benefits were really, really nicely tied in, and we really successfully used remote therapy with Archie for over 6 months. And that was really crucial whilst we were waiting for that communication aid to come, that progress didn't sort of stagnate or stay the same. We didn't maintain. We could really ensure progress continued to be made and language work was still being done. And it just really made sure that whilst we were all at home and all feeling a little bit unsure, we were still able to have some really key positive outcomes for this young person. So we're going to move on to the next case today. There's another client of mine, and this is Ryan. And when Niki and I have been preparing this presentation, we wanted to make sure that we were being really reflective and transparent about, yes, there's so many benefits and it works so well, but actually these are some of the barriers. And for some people, as mentioned earlier, teletherapy isn't necessarily the most appropriate option. So Ryan is, as you can see from the picture, a complete delight to work with. He'd been working on using eye gaze with an ATtran frame, and he's at a much earlier developmental level than Archie. So we were working on very concrete language in familiar, routine, motivating activities. Ryan doesn't have electronic AAC. That ATtran was really the focus of the sessions. And Ryan can be a bit more variable in his presentation. So he might have seizure activity one day. He has very tight muscle tone in his arms and legs, so he sometimes finds it really difficult to get a comfortable night's sleep, which then obviously can impact on how he feels the next day. And he's quite easily distracted. He loves to see what's going on around him. He had a great existing relationship with me, and the sessions that we used to do face-to-face before the pandemic were going really well. He was making good progress. But Ryan can also be, he can quite firmly tell you when he doesn't want to do something. And when we had trialed electronic AAC using eye gaze, it worked really well at home for a couple of weeks. And then we got a rolling floor mount to make access easier, and he would close his eyes and pop his head down. And he was very deliberately refusing to interact with the screen. And for the duration of sort of screen time, Ryan didn't want to interact with the screen. He found that sort of abstract notion of me being on the screen a little bit too tricky. So we really needed to think flexibly then about, coming back to that, our core values as therapists, that person-centered approach. How are we going to ensure that Ryan continues to make progress if possible, maintains the skills we've been working on sort of pre-COVID, And so what we did was create a therapy pack, which was over a 4-week rolling period with 2 areas of key progress and things to work on, some targets, and then specific activities, fun, motivating things that parents could do when it was most convenient for them, because Ryan's parents were both working full-time through the pandemic as well, to ensure that that was really as flexible and as convenient as we could possibly make it. So it was just important about recognising that, okay, direct teletherapy sessions aren't Ryan's preferred method of input from me, and they're not really working for him. We're going to flex that, create a communication pack for him to carry out. But teletherapy was actually still quite instrumental in facilitating multidisciplinary meetings. So I was still able to keep in touch with his OT, physio, case manager. We were still able to link up with parents frequently, check that everything was going well. Is anything else needed? Can we tweak it? Can we offer anything to increase progress and still support? And I think that was another benefit actually of, okay, the direct sessions weren't working too well, but telehealth and remote input was still really positive with maintaining that multidisciplinary discussion and teamwork. We're going to go to one of Niki's case studies now.
Thanks, Em. So this is a case study for a client that I support. His name's Will, and he's 10 years old. And I've worked with Will for the past almost 2 years now, actually, quite a long time. So we have a really good established relationship that was good before the pandemic. He originally started off actually as an AAC user, using it to support his verbal language, which was still emerging. And during the lockdown, actually, he's made that much progress using telehealth that he's moved away from using his AAC, and he's now a complete verbal communicator, which, as you can imagine, everybody is overjoyed about. And it just means that for him now, his iPad is purely for fun, and also for accessing telehealth, which is really motivational for him because it's on a screen, which he loves, he's used to accessing anyway. And it means that actually he's got somebody else that he gets to see. Because for Will, he is one of our clients that didn't have much interaction with other adults or other professionals during lockdown in a face-to-face capacity. So maintaining our relationship over telehealth was actually instrumental in just making sure we were still making progress during such a long lockdown without contact. I couldn't have done any of my remote sessions without Will's fantastic parents, who have been just supportive throughout. We originally decided that we would trial some hour-long telehealth sessions as was originally done in person. So an hour session targeting things like language work, some play skills and some social communication skills. We found actually that was not going to be the right thing for him. An hour sitting at a screen in his comfortable home, which let's be honest, for all of us, home is the place where there should be less demands. We should be able to relax, chill out, and if we want to put the TV on or pick up a game, that's what we do. So to try and get him to sit for an hour when he's out of a school routine, actually it was just a bit too much. So we decided, let's work flexibly and let's be pragmatic. We can still give an hour, but let's split it into 2 sessions across the week. And the results of that were just fantastic. He's remaining engaged for the whole half an hour, where previously we would have lost engagement towards the end of a session. So it's meant that productivity has increased, progress towards targets has increased, and we've just managed to actually make huge progress during a lockdown, where at the beginning I would have been pleased with maintenance of skills, really. So you can see a little image on screen here. This is a screenshot of a sort of mock-up of one of my sessions with Will. Will really enjoys having his therapy provision in the form of a PowerPoint on his device. It makes it very clear what is set out, and we work through the PowerPoint. When we get to the end, we've finished, and he's then free to choose whatever he wants to do. A really nice thing about doing it this way, actually, is that I can record his answers on screen, as you can see here. We asked him to describe an ice cream, and these are some of the answers that we got. After each session, I was then able to send this over to his parents and his school staff to ensure that even though his TA wasn't able to attend all sessions, she could still see exactly what we were doing and exactly the progress he was making towards his targets. And it's just meant that for a period where we could have lost a lot of contact with his TA, we managed to keep it up. So recently, Will's actually returned to school, but we've made the decision that this is going so well that we're actually going to stick where we are for now, because we're able to have more direct therapy time and also additional time left over, if you like, for feedback and making sure that on the move back towards school input, his parents aren't going to sort of disappear along the way, because a massive factor in the lockdown for us has been that communication with his parents was already fantastic, but it's increased again, and it's meant that generalization of skills is just throughout every single element of Will's day, and I think that's a massive contributor to why he's made so much progress. So moving forwards, we are absolutely going to carry on with at least some element of telehealth, and just making sure that parents and school team are both completely up to date with even week to week strategies of things they can be doing, activities to complete, just to make sure that we're continuing with this pace of improvement. So to acknowledge a couple of the things that didn't work so well, I've already mentioned hour-long sessions, just they weren't a goer for us, which was fine, and we were able to get past that. Distractors are often a factor for a lot of our clients in a home environment. So with Will, there was that distraction of, I'm just going to go and get a drink, or I'm just going to do something else. But I think as long as we had strategies in place, so we had some sensory regulation toys, things that we could quickly get out and just, re-regulate him and get him focused again, we were actually able to work past that. The biggie for us, really, which was a huge barrier, was it was really challenging to target social communication. We were originally doing some Lego-based therapy with Will pre-lockdown, and we did do some of that remotely. However, it's a completely different dynamic. One of the main aspects of Lego-based therapy is that it's a play-based approach, and it works with a child and their peers to develop social skills. So unfortunately, we didn't have any peers. So it was Will's parents, him, and then me on the computer screen acting as a facilitator, so guiding the session, helping it to run smoothly. And as I said, it worked well for a while, but the novelty soon wore off. So that is something I think we can't replicate online at this time for Will. But that isn't to say that it wouldn't be successful with other clients. Okay, so this is the end of our presentation. So we're going to move on to a bit of a discussion now. So I'm going to hand you over to Andrea, who's going to sort of lead this chat.
Hi, thanks very much for that. That was really great. We have got a few questions in the chat, so we'll go through those. So Janice has asked if it's affected preparation, affected the way in which you prepare the content of the sessions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to go first, and just from my experience, it's been a lot more, we've had to prepare a lot more in advance for a lot of my clients. So thinking way ahead, a month's time, 6 weeks time, what resources are they going to need for my session? So things like sending out therapy packs. I did a birthday party with one of my clients. So I prepped it 5 weeks in advance, sent it all off with all of the symbols, the cut out balloon sheets. And by the time you get there, you've sort of forgotten that you've planned it. But it's meant that staff then have got time to do the stuff that I probably would have done in the car park before I ran in, putting balloons out or sticking things together, making jellies, things like that. And the same for sessions where it's a bit more practical, like baking cakes. I've done some remote sessions baking. You're then reliant on the support team to prepare the actual physical ingredients. So it's just giving them time, prepping your side of things way in advance so that they've got time to then go out and do their part as well. What about you, Anne?
I would agree with that. I think it takes more preparation, but working from home means that I have had more time to also do that side of things. So it's been actually where typically if I'm driving around, then I've got to do an hour or two's planning and creating resources or prepping things on top of an already long day. But working remotely has made that preparation time easier, really. I can fit that in more flexibly. And because you've done it for so many weeks in advance, then there's actually longer before you then need to do it again. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Okay, and Shelley had a question, not Shelley, sorry. There was a question as well about from Ashley about what kind of platforms we've used: Zoom, Skype, Teams, Google Meet.
Yeah. All the above. WhatsApp. I've had a couple of clients on WhatsApp because that's the only thing that staff know how to use. Yeah, I don't know. Have you used anything else then?
Yeah, all of the above. In terms of what works best, I think honestly it's whatever works best for the client. So whatever they're more comfortable with or they've used the most. You know, we talked at the very beginning about regulating client anxiety levels. If I go with the system that works best for the client, they're already going to feel more comfortable before we even start the therapy session. So that then helps me, and that's a big benefit. I personally quite like the whiteboard tool that's available on Zoom and Google Classrooms, but most of the platforms, to be fair, have some sort of sharing capacity to allow that kind of visual representation. And if not, you can use your share screen and paint sort of things. You can pretty much do everything that you would want to do, I think, on most of them.
Yeah, I think support teams as well and parents, they'll all have their own preference, and some of them won't have a specific one downloaded. So for example, I was trying to talk a family through using Zoom, and by the time I'd had the conversation, it wasn't worth me then having another conversation to try again. It was just, actually, if you're more confident on WhatsApp or whatever, let's just do it that way, and focus on the therapy rather than the techie side of things.
I think as well, it's really helped, hasn't it, when we've been able to take control of the computer the other side. So we've used software to be able to do that as well at the same time, which has really worked. So rather than, so for example, if we're working on an AAC system, rather than saying, click the bit in the corner that goes to, we can actually do that and demonstrate things or model to the students themselves on their devices, which has really helped for some of those AAC users as well, hasn't it? Which has been great.
Yeah.
Has anybody else got any questions? You can either unmute yourself and ask or raise your hand and I'll come to you. I really loved, Niki, the thought of you doing therapy sessions on the beach and in the park.
Yeah, do you know what? And it's a nice change for our day as professionals as well. I think it shakes you up a little bit and challenges what you thought was a therapy session, and push your own boundaries a little bit as to your creativity. And I think every member of the AT team has just got 50 times more creative during lockdown in terms of what resources we use, whether they're paper-based that we can post or things online that we can share, and like you said, Andrea, take remote control and do things like that.
Janice, did you have a question?
Thank you, Andrea. Can I just say a huge thank you? This has been a brilliant presentation, and with my uni hat on, am I okay to share the recording link with our students when it's made available? Because I think just hearing what you've done and the enthusiasm with which you've done it would be so reassuring to student speech and language therapists.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there'd be absolutely no problem with that at all, Janice. And I think it's been a particularly difficult time for students at the moment with access to placements. And I know that a lot of students have had to move to online placements. But I think, as Niki and Emily have outlined, I think that there will be a place for remote therapy moving forward. Really, we've seen the benefits as well as some of the drawbacks, and we're in a better position to know sort of when to use it, when it will work, and when it doesn't work so well. So I think that would be a really nice message for your students to know that their teletherapy placements have been very valuable, as well as face-to-face placements. I think it's a massive but one thing that's come through all the time is the social skills thing, I think, as well, that we were able to work very much on language. We're able to work on lots of language functions. We're able to work sort of one-to-one a lot of the time, or with immediate support teams. But one thing that particularly that people have not had is access to peers throughout this a lot of the time. So I think it'll be that will be needed a lot of face-to-face sort of therapy for in the future. Anybody else have a question or comment for Niki or Emily? Shabana's saying it's a great insight into teletherapy, and lots of people giving very positive comments to you guys, so that's good. I just had one other comment about if you're taking somebody with you, Niki, on their phone to the park, it gets around to that issue we have sometimes of being another person on that person's shoulder, doesn't it? We're more of a kind of word in their ear, and giving strategies at the time rather than obviously having a person sort of with you. So for older people and adults working in the community, I think that would be a great benefit as well.
Definitely.
Okay. We will be putting, people are asking about copies of the recording. We are putting the recording on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for moving on to that one. And it will be on our website as well. And we have got, we're trying to push our social media at the moment. So we feel free to follow all of our social media at the moment. Do you have anything else to say about that, guys?
Yeah, it might just be the Instagram accounts, particularly at the moment, are really bringing new training opportunities, webinars like the one that you've logged onto today. So lots of free stuff coming through the Instagram channels and the Facebook channels. So do have a little nosy at some of those if you'd like to be kept up to date. There's some free sort of resources and training ideas and mini videos that go on there as well. So yeah, let's keep your eyes peeled.
Definitely. And we've also got some upcoming paid training opportunities as well. I'm running a Bricks for Autism course on the 1st of April. That's 9 till 3, and we do have more dates that are going to follow. So that's a training course on Lego-based therapy, and it's the only accredited Lego-based therapy training course in the world, accredited by the Autism Research Centre in Cambridge. But we do talk not only about autism, but actually about the developing evidence base for its use with clients with other communication challenges and areas to work on as well. We've also got a really exciting literacy webinar series coming up. There's a free taster session for that on the 25th of March, and that's 3:30 till 4 o'clock. And that's going to be delivered by Fran Sefton, who's one of our highly specialist speech therapists here at ATtherapy, and also Tina Voisey, previously of Toby Dinebox. All of our courses are available on Eventbrite, so we'll send you the link for our upcoming webinar after this, but also feel free to have a look on there for some of our other training sessions too.
The very next one will be around voice banking, and we're very lucky to have Nicola Hayton, who works with us as an assistive technologist, but she's a qualified speech and language therapist, so she's got that sort of dual outlook, and she's done lots of work on voice banking, and it's a really sort of hot topic at the minute. So again, we'll be hosting that webinar on Wednesday the 28th of April at 12 o'clock again. And we have got all of our courses on Eventbrite, so do go and find us on Eventbrite, and you'll see all the details of all of the webinars and all of the future training events on there. So I guess it just leads me to say thank you to you guys, Niki and Emily, for launching ATtraining. Thanks for all the hard work you've put into the presentation. And really, you know, we're open to questions, so please email the info@attherapy.co.uk if you think of a question you wish you'd asked when Niki and Emily have gone. We're always available for questions. So thanks very much to everyone for attending our first session, but thanks so much to Niki and Emily for such an informative and interesting session. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Lots of really positive comments for you guys. I'll let the session run until all the positive comments end. Cool. Thank you. See you later then. Bye bye.